Joining us now is Michael McFaul, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. Professor McFaul, thanks for being with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Let me ask just how you think Russia will respond to this. Russia obviously has been Assad's greatest ally in Syria, not just in politics, but in military matters as well. Lots of Russian military personnel, lots of Russian weaponry, lots of Russian missile defense systems on the ground in Syria. How are they going to respond to this?
Well, as you've just been discussing, if there are Russian casualties, that will trigger, of course, a radical negative response. And I hope that there weren't, and I hope that that was coordinated before this attack. So far, the Russian government stance has been that there wasn't a chemical weapons attack, and that they've denied that. And so right now, their formal position, I think, will be to defend their ally, Mr. Assad, and defend the sovereignty of the state of Syria. Having said that, there's a little but in my head, which is to say that in 2013, I was in the government, I was with the president when he met with President Putin. We did a deal with the Russians to eliminate chemical weapons in Syria. And at that time, President Putin was the hero. Let's remember that. He was the guy that convinced Assad to get rid of all these weapons, or so we thought. This doesn't make him look like a hero. And so I can imagine a scenario where they do not overreact, because after all, this has been a very limited attack. This is not an escalatory attack. This is not regime change, just as all your previous guests have said. I could foresee a response that was much more muted than you might otherwise think, but because Putin himself was involved in getting rid of, or at least trying to get rid of, these chemical weapons in the first place.
There has been, on the issue of what this chemical weapons attack was on Tuesday, obviously there was an international effort where there was verified disposal of thousands of tons of Syrian chemical weapons. They had a huge weapons of mass destruction stockpile, and a lot of that stuff was gotten rid of. Since then, there have been a number of allegations of the use of chemical weapons, but ultimately, what it boiled down to in most of those allegations is that something like chlorine or something like mustard was used, that there was a chemical element to a conventional attack, but they weren't, technically speaking, it was weapons of mass destruction. We do not have confirmation that this was a sarin attack on Tuesday. The Turkish Health Ministry has said that it is. No other official body has made that sort of declaration. As far as we understand it, that's still a matter of international investigation. Is there an argument to be made that before there was any official determination about the use of banned chemical weapons, that this may have been a premature response?
That's a hard question, because you're absolutely right about the forensics of what was exactly used. For me, as somebody who was involved in those negotiations back in 2013, I'm wondering about the inspections regimes. What went wrong that this was allowed to happen? And most certainly, it was a rapid response. I watched what the president said yesterday. It was clear to me that he wanted to do something, and he did something. I have to say, for me personally, I support the response. There's just been too many people that were innocently killed in Syria, for me, where we didn't do enough. And at least to put Mr. Assad on notice that there will be a response, I think, is a good thing. The thing I worry about, however, is what if he doubles down? He gets to respond to this, by the way. It's not just like we get a vote and he doesn't get a vote. And I worry about whether he challenges the United States, he challenges the international regime by escalating and perhaps using chemical weapons again. What will then be the response from the United States and the Western world? But today, I think it was the appropriate response for a horrible terrorist attack that President Assad did to innocent civilians in Syria.
Mr. Ambassador, let me just ask you one last point on that matter that you just said in terms of Assad having a vote and it not just being our action and there's no response. Several Pentagon officials told Nancy Youssef, who's a reporter who's now at BuzzFeed, a very experienced reporter on national security matters. Yep. Several Pentagon officials told her this week that the chemical weapons, what appears to have been this chemical weapons attack on Tuesday by Assad, may itself have been an action that Assad took to test the United States. After Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, said on Thursday that it's up to the Syrian people whether or not Assad is their leader, after the U.S. appeared to back off its previous insistence that Assad must go, that the attack on Tuesday itself may have been a test of the new administration, essentially to find out where the new lines are. From your experience in these matters, from the way that you've seen this unfold over the years, does that seem plausible to you?
Well, I've heard that reporting, and I don't want to doubt that reporting. It doesn't seem plausible to me. I don't think it would be that quick of a causal chain, right? That they said that on a few days ago, and then they decided to do this. I can tell you that the supporters of the Assad regime, including those in Moscow, did react to those statements from Trump administration officials. That seemed like it was a departure in policy. And as of yesterday, it was a radical departure from that departure, as you yourself were just talking about earlier in the program. And now this is a radical departure from previous, more deliberative responses before taking this action. And I think it makes everybody uncertain about where this goes forward.
Former Russia Ambassador Michael McFaul, now professor at Stanford University. Professor, thank you very much. It's good to have you with us tonight.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thanks
Brian?
for having me.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.